in my last video, I was talking about, I read a little more than half of a paragraph that was written by Maurice Merleau-Ponty in his book, The Phenomenology of Perception. And I put a link to it so you could read along or take a look at it after. But in this video, well, let me just go back for a second. To the last video. In the last video, there was this kind of um, there was this way of thinking, this style of thought that Merleau-Ponty was sort of using to unfold his argument, and he was drawing upon, real life, real world examples, um, and trying to get concrete about freedom and to get out of this abstract, this the abstract sort of notions which are sort of ready-made and come with our thinking about, or very commonly come with, or are pre-given in our thinking about these issues, such as people will talk about determinism versus indeterminism. So that it's automatically about, mechanistic, reductionist, thermodynamic, uh, Newtonian kinematics and uh, and mechanics versus, say, like a further reductionist argument, which is still reductionist about quantum physics, or or something like, or you'll go into logical analysis, or he, Merleau-Ponty wants to get to a one level below this, and he talks about, the way that there's this generality of the situation and of our life with other people, of our past, which feeds into our present and into the future, and of course the future becomes the past, and there's this interweaving between people and ourselves, and these motives, our moral system, and our relationships with other people and with ourselves, and in our situation in the world, that this sort of like this looping that it doesn't allow us to to make an absolute choice, a totally free choice, because there's always this motivation from the past and the future, present, in the present. But at the same time, we have this power to take up our situation and sort of engage that situation, or to pull back and place ourselves in another situation. By virtue of the fact of being situated in this larger world, you get the possibility of errors being made, of illusions and things like this, different types, modes of existence, like the illusory object, the true object, etc. And how all of this is very much grounded in, um, this kind of active transcendence, or what he calls an ekstase. It's based in the temporality of of our body, and the skillful, so it's not, skillful coping, our skillful engagement, intentional engagement with the world, with our bodies, which we often take for granted. And in fact, it's that taking for granted of the world which allows us to sort of to have this kind of freedom to move into and create new things, to create new situations. And in fact, it demands it. But so there was this dialectic that I presented there um, between being totally determined by the situation and total freedom from our own acts and explicit choices and decisions that we make, conscious decisions and choices. And he, interwove those to show that, it's both at once. Um, and in that sense, it was neither, because when you combine the two, it's some third way of seeing things that's not reducible to either of the two. But anyway, there is another, um, sort of dialectic, which is very similar, which Merleau-Ponty wants to talk about, not on the level of personal existence, human existence and freedom, but related to that, insofar as it presupposes it, about our organismic, existence, the existence of biological, non-human, um, agency, I guess you could say. And there is the same kind of dialectic, although a little bit, although it's very much, the configuration is different. Although it follows the same kind of general style. And I want to read it. It's a passage here I'm going to read from his earlier book, which is entitled "The Structure of Behavior," which is more of a biologically oriented view rather than phenomenologically. Um, and what he's talking about here is how an animal's body in relationship to the environment is really this interplay, this sort of melodic, rhythmic, oscillatory interplay, which is sort of which is the enaction or actualization of the animal's engagement with the world, the organism's engagement with the world. And so the structure of the environment determines what possibilities there are for the animal, and the animal's, bodily being, its way of moving, the fact that it has eyes or hands um, and these kinds of things determines its motivations to and also the kind of world that it brings forth. I mean, there's no such thing as just one environment, right? I mean, the what counts as a world or just a surface for one animal is different for another, depending on the space and time and the scale of the space and time in which it is, its body is comporting towards and acting, and also according to the wider environment in which it's situated, um, due to its physical makeup and its biological, I guess you could say, teleology or biological abilities, capacities, and the organism. So there's all these different elements that are feeding into this conversation between the organism and the environment. And so Merleau-Ponty wants to ask, can we say that the organism is just this ball of reflexes and which the situation is determining, or is, somehow life this totally free, vital impetus, vital force that's independent of the physical environment? If it has this uh, supernatural capacity because it's somehow transcendent in above physical being in its vital or living being. And he says, it's not either one of those, and we can't say that it's the animal that's deciding, or that it's that it's just a pure reflex to the outside environment. So he says, Merleau-Ponty writes, the organism cannot properly be compared to a keyboard, a keyboard on which the external stimuli would play, and in which their proper form would be delineated, for the simple reason that the organism contributes to the constitution of that form. When my hand follows each effort of a struggling animal while holding an instrument for capturing it, it is clear that each of my movements responds to an external stimulation. But it is also clear that these stimulations could not be received without the movements by which I expose my receptors to their influence. When the eye and the when the eye and the ear follow an animal in flight, it is impossible to say which started first in the exchange of stimuli and responses. Since all movements of the organism are always conditioned by external influences, one can, if one wishes, readily treat behavior as an effect of the milieu. But in the same way, since all of the stimulations which the organism receives have in turn been made possible only by its preceding movements, which have culminated in exposing the receptor organ to the external influences, one could also say that the behavior is the first cause of the stimulations. So you can say that that's the external environment, which is uh, which is the cause of the animal's behavior, or you can say that it's the animal's behavior coming to meet the environment, which is the first cause of the animal's own behavior. And there's really no way to to say which came first. It's a chicken or the egg problem, and it's kind of it's a ending. It's circular basically, and that's very similar to what Merleau-Ponty was saying about freedom and how the past and the present. No present just begins all by itself without some cause, without some motivation which preceded it. At the same time, no motivation is an absolute, is not a total commitment in which we have no room for committing ourselves to some other situation. And anyway, he continues and he says, thus the form of the excitant, so let's say the light impinging on my retina, says the form of the excitant is created by the organism itself, by its proper manner of offering itself to actions from outside. So he says the form of the excitant is created by the organism itself by the organism's proper manner of offering itself to actions from outside. Doubtless, in order to be able to subsist, the organism must encounter a certain number of physical and chemical agents in its surroundings. But it is the organism itself, according to the proper nature of its receptors, the thresholds of its nerve centers, and the movements of the organs, which chooses the stimuli in the physical world to which it will be sensitive. The environment, or the Umwelt in German, the environment emerges from the world through the actualization or the being of the organism. Granted that an organism can exist only if it succeeds in finding in the world an adequate environment. This would be, so in this case, it would be, he says, this would be a keyboard which moves itself in such a way as to offer, and according to variable rhythms, such and such of its keys to the in itself monotonous action of an external hammer. So it's funny, he says that here, yeah, maybe you can kind of see the environment as playing upon our receptors, our sensory receptors, as and determining the motor effector reflexes by which we can say like track a bird that's flying by. You know, we have to, you know, behaviorists would say that the light hits our eye and that there's a reflex which, you know, it causes us to track in smooth pursuit to track the bird and watch it as it flies by. But Merleau-Ponty wants to say no, it's a more of a motivation. You can't say that it's just the external stimulus that's doing it, because very often the organism is the one that moves to expose its receptors to the animal, and then the animal, you know, the light from the animal's body is impinging upon our retina, and then you have to move to follow it, and when you follow it, you change the sensory stimulation that hits your retina, and that sensory stimulation on the retina, you know, again, you know, motivates you to keep, you know, so there's this constant circular loop or interplay going on here, and it's very similar to to his the example that I gave in the past, but in an organismic context. And it's interesting. He says that, yeah, we could think of ourselves as a kind of keyboard, which is, you know, depending on the way that the light hits our eyes, a certain, you know, a certain perception is brought forth. Just like when we press certain keys on a keyboard, certain sounds are brought, and rhythms and tones and meanings are brought forth, musical meanings. But he says that, but it would be, on the other hand, a keyboard which moves itself. So a kind of like a keyboard that is exposing itself to these uh, to these, because you could call them you know, stimuli, according to these variable rhythms that are sort of a priori in the organism, such so in such a way as to offer such or such of its keys to the in itself monotonous action of an external hammer, by which he means being or nature. Thanks.